Okay, let's get to the next question. Um, so yeah, we just did that one. Okay. 100% Ashkenazi, or is something else going on? I took DNA tests on myheritage.com. I know it's bad for ethnicity estimates because it has smaller population sample, but it was more affordable than anything else, and I was getting illogically excited about this DNA test. So I took it. As far as I know, I'm only Ashkenazi Jewish. I got 93.2% Ashkenazi Jewish and 6.8% Northwestern European. I uploaded my DNA to mytrueancestry.com and paid for the footman level. All right, well, I can tell you already, my true ancestry is not going to give you anything genealogically relevant that's going to give you a more narrow focus and a better idea of what you're dealing with. Probably going to cause you more confusion, but let's continue. According to this website, I'm matching with a Crusader or two, which seems to confirm the Northwestern European. Yeah, that wouldn't necessarily be the case. According to my true ancestry, I have only a small genetic distance from some Jewish samples in Erfurt and samples in medieval Italy and Ancestry, and the Byzantine Empire, and somewhat larger 12.46 distance from 16th century descendants of Muslims in Granada, Spain. However, I paid $20 to upload my DNA to Family Tree DNA, and they gave me almost 99% Ashkenazi, around 1% Sephardic, and around 0.1 or 0.2% Middle Eastern. What I'm wondering is this all just Ashkenazi? Are the SNPs I share with Germans, French people, Middle Eastern Jews, and Sephardic Jews common in Ashkenazi Jews as well? And they randomly gave me this. If so, does it tell me anything about what parts of Northern/Eastern Europe my ancestors were from 800 years ago? So right off the bat, all of this stuff that they did doesn't have any genealogical relevance. I mean, we're talking about ancient samples of people who lived thousands of years ago. And from what we've known through both from a mathematical standpoint and a genetic standpoint is when you look a couple of thousand years back, the amount of ancestry you have that is outside of your considered ancestry. So for Ashkenazi Jewish, you go back 2,000 years. Yeah, you're probably going to see a large majority of ancestors who were some sort of a Jewish relation in a sense, I guess you could say, but you're also going to find ancestors from all over the place. And, just think about how many people go back a couple hundred years and find an ancestor they weren't expecting. But the more you go back, the further you go back in time, the more ancestors you have, and the more likely that it is that you come from an ancestry that's outside of what you expect. So even if you're Ashkenazi Jewish, you find some Crusaders from a couple, 1,000 years ago, even if it's, like 1,000 years ago, there's a big possibility that you're somehow related to them. And it's not, yeah. So a lot of this stuff, this is not, I never recommend anything like My True Ancestry or, I think Genome Leak is one of them, or just, these other sites where their focus is the deep ancestral, samples and things like that, which it is interesting. And if you have an interest in it that way, go for it. But if your interest is largely just trying to figure out your ancestry through these percentages and stuff, you're just making it more confusing. And that's one of the biggest issues with the admixtures is that it's pushed so much by the companies, it's advertised so much by the companies, and then people really dig into that, thinking that somehow they're gonna, the more they dive in and the more sites they look at the percentages and this and that, they're gonna get a better idea. And really it's just gonna confuse you more because these ethnicity estimates are just estimates. There's a lot of issues with them, and they're the least reliable part of these DNA tests. Which then, because it's the most advertised and most talked about part of DNA tests, is why we see people going, oh, DNA tests are a fraud. DNA tests are a scam. It's like, I know for a fact they aren't a scam. I've proven it many, 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 many times over the past 11 years that I've been doing DNA testing, proving stuff, helping adoptees find their families, connecting people with family members that they haven't seen forever, solving crimes, identifying unknown human remains. And so that's the power, but the mixture stuff is not. And this is a perfect question to go and show why. And I mean, this person may have also gone to GEDmatch and then used the GEDmatch calculators, and then they get on them, Ancestry, and then they get on to 23andMe, and then they, and they just add more and more data of these percentages, and then it's just like, well, I don't know. So, okay, now with all of that said, let's just get back to the meat of this. I got 93.2% Ashkenazi, 6.8% Northwestern European. Now, I personally don't see Northwestern European coming in as a common thing for people with Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry, even on my heritage. So that does stand out a bit. But it is interesting that for family tree DNA, they aren't picking up any Northwestern Europeans. So there is a certainly big question mark of, is that 6.8% Northwestern European true, or is it some sort of a misread, or, just a really big percentage of noise for some reason. So it may be worthwhile to look at some other calculators to see if that Northwestern European is coming up, but nothing really beyond that necessarily. And really with the mindset of, if I do see, okay, we've gone to family tree DNA, they're not seeing any Northwestern European, so my confidence is much lower that this is a true segment of Ancestry. But then, let's say you do get a test from MyHeritage, and then they give you a very similar percentage of Northwestern European. To me, then that's indicative, okay, we're looking at something very, very possibly likely. So then we need to consider, what are the percentages we expect for the different ancestries? And so with 6.8%, we're looking at most likely a second great-grandparent. Could be a great-grandparent you really didn't inherit that much from, or could be a third great-grandparent that you did inherit a lot from, but the biggest thing being that it's about a second great-grandparent. So now the goal would be, build out your family tree to every single second and third great-grandparent to try to identify them. And if that 6.8% Northwestern European is truly coming from one recent ancestor, which would probably be more likely the case than multiple distant ancestors, just because of the history of Jews in Northwestern Europe. But 6.8%, you may be able to, once you get to second great grandparents, all of a sudden you see a grandparent where it's like, okay, that is not a Jewish person. That is definitely somebody else. And then all of a sudden you figured out where that's coming from. But then on the flip side, let's say that, you get an ancestry test and it comes back similar to family tree DNA, where it's basically like, yeah, you're almost all Ashkenazi Jewish, or even maybe 100% Ashkenazi Jewish. That happens, and it's like, okay, it's probably because MyHeritage is just having some really bad misread for some reason, and still a lot less likely. But the thing with reading these other admixtures is, it's really just to get an idea of, is it going to be worth the time to try to identify all the second and third great grandparents with this in mind? Or is it so unlikely that, it may not be worth the time? But I mean, that's the thing, is you could also just say, you know what? I do want to identify all my second and third great grandparents, because that's something a lot of, that's a big goal for a lot of people, is to do that. Right now I've identified all of my great grandparents, and I'm still trying to identify one of my paternal great grandmother's parents. And I know almost nothing about her, even with all the DNA testing and everything I've done, mitochondrial DNA testing, cousins testing, testing on all the different sites and all of that. Still a big question mark. So, you may run into that, especially because, Ashkenazi Jewish, not uncommon to have that sort of a brick wall. The other thing to consider too, do you have cousins who have done DNA testing, or other relatives? Most especially older generations. So not just older age, but older generations. So, aunts, uncles, grandparents, things like that. As opposed to, like first cousins or siblings or nieces or nephews or children or stuff like that. Basically, the older the generation you go, the better the results you get. So let's say that 6.8% truly is representative Northwestern European ancestry, and it's from your dad's side. Well, if your dad tests or one of his siblings test, then you would probably see an even bigger percentage of Northwestern European. But basically, if you get these other relatives to test and you're seeing they are also getting Northwestern European, and even better on other sites outside of MyHeritage, because obviously, as you say, MyHeritage is known for not having the best ethnicity estimates, although it doesn't really have to do as much about them having a smaller population sample or a smaller database. It's more to do with the fact that they make assumptions that not all other companies are necessarily as confident about. So like defining certain population groups, a lot of other companies don't feel they have enough data to just specifically define Sephardic Jewish, but MyHeritage does it. So it's kind of that sort of thing of like they're a little bit riskier with it, I guess you could say. But yeah, so getting, more relatives tested could be helpful too. So a lot of possible ways to go with it. Yeah, I think that should be good. This capitalize my T. This question was reviewed during the Professional Genealogist Reacts live stream on March 12th, 2024. The year of our Lord, 2024. Okay. All right, let's see what's chat saying. My true ancestry exposed. Yes, Scott, the estimates change all the time. And the reason they change is just because they've done more testing and they've figured out, we actually are much more confident in the results this way. And so with the companies that release white papers, which MyHeritage does not, but like 23andMe does. So let's pull up one of those white papers. With the white papers, you actually get the information of how are they coming up with this stuff. So they have publications that you can look through, like the actual, all the stuff, there's a lot that goes into this, but they also have the white papers. And so, there's a lot of stuff to, what they put out, because it's not just the estimates or the, DNA stuff. It's also, health stuff, the wellness, the, Neanderthal stuff. So ancestry composition. And the biggest thing, which I talk about this all the time, is precision and recall. Let's just jump right to it. And so with precision and recall, it's basically just a statistical measure of how well, all right, it's going to take longer than I thought. How well can they actually read it? So, first you can see, like with 23andMe, you can see the reference population sample composition, what actually makes it up. How much of it is specific to 23andMe, how much of it is public, and how many of that sample is, the total. So that kind of gives you an idea too. But even better, we have the precision and recall. And so it's this stuff, the precision and recall, that gives us the best idea of how good are they reading it. Basically, when they do new studies and they put things through these statistical measurements, if they're getting better precision and recall, they're probably going to want to go with that. Because, like, look at this. Mongolian and Manchuria. We have a precision of 38.1 and a recall of 91.6. And then if we're looking at the standard deviation of 0.8, then it changes slightly. So you can see how we have, some of these are super confident. Ashkenazi Jewish, super confident. Eastern European, not quite as confident. Still up there in the 80s, but, not quite as confident. Then, we look at all of Europe, Northwestern Europe. Oh, yeah, we're pretty good about that. Britain and Ireland, decent, but not quite as good. Central Western Europe, not even worse. So depending on, whether you're expecting an ancestry and not getting it, or you're getting an ancestry that you didn't expect, that's where precision and recall really comes into help. So pull up some visual aids to help explain this, because I always have trouble explaining this without it. So with precision and recall, they're looking at those two things. One is looking at, of all the people that we expected to have this, how many are actually getting it? And then the other is, of all the people that are getting it, how much actually have it? So precision, how many retrieved items are relevant? So you can see it's the true positives over here over all positives. So basically precision is, of all the things that we labeled as this one thing, how many truly were that? So going back, we have our precision. And so sub-Saharan African, of all the people that did DNA testing and they were and they were read sub-Saharan African, only 1% of those people didn't actually have sub-Saharan African. They were known false positives. But then for the recall, 98.6. What recall is that's the how many relevant items are retrieved. So how many true positives out of all the known positives, or what the positives that you'd expect. So for this, of all of the people that did the DNA test where we would expect them to have African ancestry, only 1.4% didn't actually get it. So for someone with sub-Saharan African ancestry, they're going to be getting it's very likely that they're going to be getting what they expect. But then let's jump down over here to, we have Egypt other, right? So for Egypt other, out of all of the people that are getting Egypt, only 74.1% of them are known positives, and the other 25.9% are known false positives. So they should not have come up. So if you get Egypt and you weren't expecting it, you have a higher possibility that, well, you really aren't supposed to be getting Egypt. You're just a false positive. But then it does have a pretty good recall. So of all of the people that they tested, that they were like, okay, we expect for them to get Egyptian, or this Egypt other, 90.2% of them got it, but 9.8% didn't. So if you're expecting to get Egyptian ancestry, then you do have a higher likelihood that they're going to read that well. But if you aren't expecting it and you get the Egyptian, that confidence that, okay, I truly have Egyptian isn't as high, because you do have that precision number. So they're trying to bring that up. But then you have some, like, look at this, Northern Asia. I mean, those numbers are, you have so many people getting Northern Asian, Mongolian, and Manchuria who shouldn't be getting it. But of the people that do expect to get it, they are getting pretty good numbers. So it's, they're able to tell, okay, these people are Mongolian and Manchurian, but then they can't figure out necessarily the other, of everyone they read. Are they going to be able to confidently say that they have it, or are they going to say it and there's a higher possibility, like with this, that you really should be getting it? So yeah, okay, let's let's jump into